that?
Small but scrappy, it works.
I run fast.
There you go.
So microphones are live.
Yeah, we're
Please
picking
talk
that up.
directly into your microphone to make sure that all of the viewers at home will hear you. And if you need to have a private conversation, hit this button, and it'll mute it, and you can talk with whoever you want, as long as they mute their microphone as well.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Vivian.
Remember to hit that button. I've seen it on TV, you know.
I'm used to it in the courthouse too, because our mics are always on too, so you gotta be
right.
careful when your client leans over to you to say something.
Hit the button, man.
That's actually quite stressful in that scenario.
Yeah, it is, especially because our clients don't never pay attention to it. They start talking long before you.
Things you don't want them to say.
Good evening, candidates, and good evening, audience. My name is Jose Miguel Sandoval, and I am the committee member of the Inter-Neighborhood Council of Durham, INC. Welcome to the Candidates Forum. INC is an organization of more than 30 neighborhoods in Durham. We sponsor candidates' debates in most local elections to inform the residents of Durham about their choices on individuals empowered to decide on local policy. And now I have a message from Professor Will Wilson, who is the president of INC. He couldn't be here. The Inter-Neighborhood Council seeks members from neighborhoods across Durham for a broad representation of views. Please join us as guests or new members this coming Tuesday, October 22nd, as we determine topics and issues we shall address over the coming year. These potential issues range from parks and transportation to stormwater and development. We meet from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the Golden Bells Arts Complex, which is in 807 East Main Street. The meetings are held in the conference room of the Department of Neighborhood Improvement Services on the 3rd floor of building number 2. Parking is available in front and in the rear of building number 2. Let me introduce the candidates contesting for 3 seats at large for City Council. From left to right, Mr. Joshua Gunn, Ms. Jillian Johnson, Mr. Daniel Mayer, Ms. Javiera Caballero, and Ms. Jacqueline Wagstaff. Candidates, this evening we have a format of questions and answers, including an opening statement and a closing statement. We're going to rotate the starting point of the rounds of questions. We would like to restrict the time for answers to 90 seconds, a minute and a half. You're welcome to keep your answers short. We have many questions collected from neighbors, and we would like to cover as many topics as we possibly can. We would like to end the event by 8:15 p.m. Our commitment is to empty the chambers by 8:30. At the end of the event, we encourage the candidates to mingle with the audience. And now I'd like to give the signal to Jillian Johnson, who has something to say about a candidate who could not make it today, Mr. Charlie Reese.
Thank you so much. So unfortunately, Charlie couldn't be with us this evening and asked us to just read a quick statement to you all on his behalf. To the members of the Inter-Neighborhood Council, first and foremost, I want to express my sincere regret at not being able to join you for tonight's City Council Candidate Forum. Over the weekend, I injured my back lifting some heavy equipment, and as a result, I've been confined to my bed since Sunday evening. If it weren't for the fact that it is excruciatingly painful for me to stand or walk or even sit up straight, I would definitely have been with you tonight. As it is, this letter will have to suffice. 4 years ago, I ran for the Durham City Council because I wanted to make sure that Durham remained a place where everyone can afford to live and work and raise their kids, no matter how much money they make or what part of the city they call home. I'm proud of the work the City Council has done over the last 4 years to make Durham a safer, more affordable, and more prosperous city. I'm proud that there's less crime today than there was 4 years ago, and I'm proud of all the work we've done to bring more affordable housing and more living wage jobs to Durham. Yet despite the progress we've made over the last 4 years, we still have so much work to do. That's why I'm running for re-election, to continue our unprecedented investments in housing access and affordability, to transform our economic development work into an engine of prosperity for our most vulnerable neighbors, and to partner with neighborhoods to find and fund strategies to reduce harm and increase community safety. Serving as a member of the Durham City Council has been the greatest privilege of my public life. It's also the best job I've ever had. I would be honored to serve for another 4-year term, and so I'm asking for your vote tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to have this letter read aloud, and once again, I am so sorry that I cannot be there with you tonight. Best regards, Charlie Reese.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Audience, there are some rules for you I would like to suggest. We prefer that you do not interrupt the candidate's speech. We suggest that you hold your applause till the end of the debate. And most importantly, we want you to silence your phones. You will be wasting your time if you plan to record these proceedings. This event is being broadcast live on Spectrum, on cable channel 8, Google Fiber channel 8, Frontier channel 70, and AT&T Uverse channel 99. And tomorrow, you can find a copy of this event, an electronic copy of this event, on the City YouTube channel. This event is also being closed captioning. You have an opportunity to ask questions to candidates. We have volunteer students from Duke University and from North Carolina Central University. And I'm going to name them, and maybe you could raise your hands to identify yourselves. I have Elaine Yee, who is going to be the timekeeper, Mihir Belamkonda, who is helping, Trey Vender, on my side here, helping as well, and Maiseo Tanks, who's standing in the back. And these students are going to collect from you questions that you may like to ask the candidates. They have some postcards and pens. We encourage you to call the attention of these students, of these volunteers, Trey and Maiseo. They will bring the questions to the back table. The questions will be checked against the questions that we already have written and prepared. And the question will be brought to me, and I will read them to the candidates. Our questions will be asked by a panel of 3 Durham residents. They are Mr. Akram Al-Turk, who is a resident of Trinity Park, and he has lived in Durham for 6 years. Ms. Pat Carstensen, who is the secretary of INC, who is a resident of Cross Counties, and she has lived in Durham for 31 years. Mr. John Rooks Jr., who is a resident of Ashton Hall. He has lived in Durham for 31 years. And I will be asking some questions from the audience. I am Jose Miguel Sandoval, a resident of Woodcroft, and I have lived in Durham for 36 years. So we'll begin the proceedings by giving the candidates an opportunity for an opening statement. Mr. Gunn.
Your microphone's this one, the green.
Oh, I'm at the wrong mic. Okay. Hey, everybody. How we doing? Good evening. Again, my name is Joshua Gunn. It is an honor and a privilege to be here today. I am a Durham native, born and raised here in Durham. You'll often hear me introduce myself as a 4th-generation Durhamite. My family's been in this community for several generations. My great-grandfather moved to Durham just 1 generation removed from slavery. He was enslaved on a plantation in Yanceyville in Caswell County here in North Carolina and heard about a town where economic opportunity existed for all people. That place was Durham, and it attracted my great-grandfather here, as it did many other black folks at the turn of the century. My family's been here ever since then, and I'm running for office to reinvigorate that spirit of economic opportunity that attracted my great-grandfather here so many generations ago. We have 50,000 people in our city living in poverty today. We have a homicide rate that is double from 2018 to 2019. We have a crisis of public safety in our community, and I fear that our council lacks the proper perspective to address those concerns. I feel like we have a fragmented economic development strategy that looks at things in silos rather than a comprehensive approach to ensure that we're not only addressing the root causes, but we're also addressing the symptoms of economic despair and poverty. So I'm running for office to connect democracy back to all of the people of Durham. I'm also running for office to end the focus on special interest and to break up the control of our government that is too heavily dependent upon one political action committee in our city. I'm running because 3 of our incumbents have chosen to run together, and to me that signals an end of democracy. That signals a voting block, and I'm running to end that voting block and restore the voice of the people here in Durham. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. Thank you again, everyone, for coming out tonight. My name's Jillian Johnson. I am serving my first term on City Council, currently serving as Mayor Pro Tem. Moved here to Durham 20 years ago to go to undergrad and have been here ever since. I live in the West End neighborhood, and I have 2 kids who are Durham natives. They got lucky. And have been working, before running for City Council, was working primarily in the nonprofit sector with youth empowerment organizations. I'm running for re-election because I'm proud of the work that we've done so far here as I've been a member of City Council, and I also know that we have a lot more work to do. I have a full platform online at jillianfordurham.com/platform, which focuses on 5 key areas: democracy and inclusion, inclusive economic development, community safety, sustainability, and housing access and affordability. These are our most critical priorities as a community. And we've done a lot of work on those priorities over the last 4 years. We've made unprecedented investments in affordable housing. We've created a pilot direct democracy program that engaged over 10,000 people in the last year. But we know that we still have to do more. I'm excited about the work that we have moving forward, including bringing more residents into a conversation about community safety, making deeper investments into sustainability and doing the work that we need to do as a community to fight climate change, and working to create more sustainable transit options in the post-light rail world that we are now in. So excited to talk to you all tonight about how we can get there together. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer?
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you all for being here. My name's Daniel Meyer. I'm running for City Council. I've lived in Durham since 2002 when I graduated from University of North Carolina School of Law. I've had my own law firm. I'm a criminal defense attorney here in Durham. I've had my own law firm for probably about 14 years at this point. My wife was born and raised in Durham. We live in the Parkwood area. One of the reasons I'm running is I see, similar to what Mr. Gunn said, there's too much of a monolithic voice on the city council and not enough discussion. There's not representation of everybody, and every voice needs to be heard. There's also a tone deafness to the issues that are actually facing Durham. We are in a public safety crisis right now. They can say crime is down over the last 4 years, but it's up over the last 3. We're telling a nationally recognized chief of police, we don't trust you. We know you say you need more officers, but we know better than you. We can't do that. We need to make sure that we work to keep the residents safe. Safety is our #1 priority. That's not just on the crime side. Yes, we need more police officers, but they're a short-term solution. You cannot police your way out of our problems. We need to focus on the economic growth, the community investments, the affordable housing and stuff as well, to make the long-term trends, to make long-term Durham safer. And that's what I want to do. We need to grow the economy. We need to make sure that all voices are heard. Sorry about that. But we need to make sure that we're paying attention to what's happening in Durham and taking care of and listening to all Durham residents.
Ms. Caballero?
Hi, good evening. I'm Javiera Caballero. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. A little bit about myself. I moved to Durham in 2010. I've been in my seat. I was the appointed seat to finish out Mayor Schul's city council seat when he won the mayorship in 2017. I like to say I put the cart before the horse, meaning I've been governing for 19 months, but this is my first campaign. I have had the privilege of living in lots of different communities, from Boone, North Carolina to Chicago, Illinois. And with that experience, I can say I've seen a wide range in how local government operates. And I'm very, very proud of how Durham runs its city. We really are a beacon. I feel very blessed that I was able to move here in 2010, and it was just by happenstance. My husband got a job, we moved here. We were fortunate enough to be able to buy a house in a time when housing prices weren't what they are right now. I'm a mom of 3 kids in Durham Public Schools. That's originally where I did a lot of my community organizing. I was a PTA president at Club Boulevard. And I can say that with all my heart, that I believe in this city, and I believe that we can find the solutions to our problems all together. And I say that because since I've been on council, we have listened to residents. We've done everything from different equitable engagement policies to eviction diversion, all because residents have come to us and asked us for these things. And so I I hope to get to your vote, and I hope to continue to lead in that way where we listen to residents, we continue to be a progressive beacon in the South, and we continue to be a model for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Ms. Wagstaff?
Good afternoon. I'm going to start off by just saying that I echo everything that has been said by the challengers. We're not running as a team, but I do agree with most of what they've said. I can also say there's a connection between Josh and I. I actually went to school, attended school, and I'm much older than him, with some of his cousins and his uncles up in Caswell County, because we still have a farm in Caswell County in the Yanceyville area. Also, I come from the slave trade background. But I just want to get to the point that why I'm running. I'm running because when you look around Durham right now, we are at a 50% increase in crime. We are at 33, 32 murders at this point, to the point that we were last year. We are living in the Wild Wild West right now in Durham, and we have a council that is just not listening to what the community is saying that they need to keep them safe. Safety should be a priority. With the growth that's happening in Durham right now, there's no way that we can continue to say that we don't need physical presence in the community to assure that people feel comfortable even coming here, migrating here. And that's one of the things that the community says to me all of the time. I think that there is a voter block here that doesn't need to be here. There's no way you can have 7 people that sit on this council and they eat, think, and sleep and drink alike and they all vote alike. That's impossible. But we have a voter block and they don't listen to everybody. I want to bring back that sensibility back to this council, so vote for me.
Thank you. We're going to start now with the question and answer segments. So I'm introducing Mr. Alturk.
Thank you, Jose, and thank you all for your introductions. Thank you all for being here. This first question is directed to all of the candidates. As you know, there's a $95 million affordable housing bond on the ballot in November. Do you support the bond? If so, why do you support it, and what particular aspects of it do you think will be most beneficial to the community? If you do not support the bond, why not, and what would you do differently? And I'll start with Mr. Gunn.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the question. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify my particular stance on the affordable housing bond. I have been very critical of many pieces or components of the bond thus far, but in general, I do support the effort to bring affordable housing here to Durham. I support the bond and what it could be. I have concerns about the leadership that is currently attached to the bond and the lack of perspective associated with those leaders. I think that we have a council that lacks authentic relationships with the people who will be directly impacted the most by this bond. And I think it's necessary to have that perspective at the table so that we ensure that this bond does what we want it to do, which is make Durham more affordable for all people. And I think that we should prioritize those most in need in our community. And I think there's one thing to have intention, right? It's one thing to have good intentions. But intentions are impacted by your ability to have, intentions are influenced by the relationships that you have to inform those intentions and ensure that they are properly implemented. So while I do support the effort to bring affordable housing here to Durham, I think that we need a proper leadership to hold folks accountable and ensure that we're prioritizing the needs of those most vulnerable in our community. And I think we lack that on council right now, and I think we need that new leadership and perspective. So in short, yes, I support the affordable housing bond. I think we need appropriate leadership to ensure that it does what it's supposed to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you for the question. I do support the affordable housing bond. I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be the step that we need, a major step, a bold step towards providing the housing that we are lacking in our community. I support the bond because I believe that without it, Durham will continue to not be able to provide affordable housing for the people who need it most. This bond is designed to provide 15,000 people with affordable housing over the next 5 years. It's focused on 2 broad pieces, both building new multifamily housing and preserving existing affordable housing. Those are both really important pieces of the puzzle. If we just build without preserving what we already have, we are not going to be able to increase the amount of housing that we have. The thing that I think is that I'm most excited about, that has the most potential for transformation, is the densification of the public housing communities in downtown. To redevelop those neighborhoods as mixed income, mixed use neighborhoods where people are not being isolated, where they have access to jobs, where there are people in that community who can afford to pay a market rent and subsidize those affordable units, and building more housing in downtown, because one of our key issues with the affordable housing crisis is not just the lack of affordable housing, is a lack of housing entirely.
Thank you,
So
Min-
the,
Yeah, if
Thank
you don't
you.
mind, because I think the timer stopped, so.
yeah, no, I'm good, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Meyer.
Should we wait for the timer? Or?
Yeah, that would be good, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. I guess my issue with the affordable housing bond, we do need to work on affordable housing. We need to make steps to do that. I think the affordable housing bond may well be a good start. My problem with it is it still seems rushed. It still seems like it's being crammed down our throats. Now, that being said, I think there's a very good chance it's going to pass. There's overwhelming people pushing it. There's no real organized opposition to it. I mean, I'm happy to help oversee it and make sure they meet the commitments, but you still see a lot of holes in it. The website that was supposed to answer all the questions only came online about a month ago. When you ask questions, they're still changing things. You know, I know that they've been meeting with special interest groups and things like that to get tweaks and get new commitments. A $95 million housing bond shouldn't still be changing during the voting period of when it's going on. You talk to the residents. Right now, go to J.J. Henderson, go to Oldham Towers, go to Liberty Street and say, what are you planning on doing with these residents while you do and change and fix their buildings? And the answer is, well, J.J. Henderson can stay here, but we're not sure about the rest. Are we really going to take our seniors and put them in McDougal Terrace or Oxford Manor? There just seems to be a rush on this bond, and I haven't heard why can't we, as soon as light rail died, suddenly we needed the affordable housing bond. I mean, there was almost no break. Why can't we take the time and study it and make sure and answer a lot of these questions rather than say, pass it now and we'll implement it right later and trust us? That's my concern. So I support the concept, I'll oversee it, but I'm not gonna say, hey, I think it's a great thing.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Ms. Caballero.
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely support the housing bond, and I think it is the right step. We are in a crisis right now, and unfortunately, because of the limitations placed on us by the state, you know, we see all these condos going up, and I get told over and over again, well, why can't we do affordable housing there? Why aren't you making those developers do it? I would happily do it. We are very much limited by what we can do. There's no rent control in North Carolina that is also banned, and those are two of the solutions. I know California just passed a massive rent control overhaul a few days ago. Why? Because they're allowed to do it. They've recognized the crisis that they're having there, and they're taking really bold policy steps. Here, unfortunately, we are having to play in a very narrow lane. And if we don't act quickly and we don't actually mitigate the crisis that we're in 5 years and 2 years, it will be too late. And I firmly believe that. For the folks who are concerned about the nuts and bolts, you know, a lot of folks, devil's in the details, every single one of those contracts will come before council. It is not just, here's the money. It's very carefully planned out. There will be lots of steps, you know, checks and balances, and I think that we, in a lot of ways, don't have a lot of choices. I think the component that I think is the most exciting is the $41 million for the multifamily, which is the nonprofit and for-profit piece, because it lets us, it gets a lot of folks, when we think about economic development, economic opportunity, it also helps on another side of the house, which it lets a lot of folks have access to good jobs.
Thank you. Ms. Wagstaff.
Well, I'll be the only dissenting vote. Like I said, we will not vote in a block. I'm absolutely against the affordable housing plan and bond. First of all, it's too fast, too quick. And it's not a coincidence that the affordable housing bond was laid in our lap right after the failed light rail. If you can't tell me what you did with $168 million in a failed project, then there's no way that I'm gonna trust that we're gonna put another project out there that's gonna overburden the taxpayers. And even though I've heard this scenario that it's only gonna add $32 more to your $250,000 home, well, what about the person that lives in the $100,000 home or the $60,000 home? It becomes a regressive tax for people that have lower means. One of the things that we have to understand is that we have to understand, have people on the council that's willing to speak with the people that are going to be most effective. I am unwilling to put my stamp on anything that would displace one resident, and there will be displacement. I sat in a meeting yesterday with one of the projects that is planned to be in this bond, Forest Hill Heights, all seniors. And those seniors were clueless to what the housing authority. They had no plan about relocation. They were asking, I asked them the question, would they be relocated to other public housing units? They said that might be in the plan. They had no real tentative plan of how they would relocate these seniors. I am not willing to sacrifice any residents in Durham for the benefit of somebody else's wealth gap.
Thank you all. The next question is just for the incumbents. Text amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance, the UDO, like the recently passed expanding housing choices, are often very technical and take some expertise to understand. Therefore, they often do not elicit broad and equitable engagement from the public. Residents must go out of their way and need time to really learn about what's in a text amendment and how it will affect them. Do you have specific proposals about how you would improve the process to allow for more and better public engagement for text amendments? And I'll start with Ms. Johnson.
Thank you for the question. That's an interesting question. I think that the problem of being very technical is actually a problem that applies to our entire zoning code, not just to text amendments. I have often had to meet with our planners to understand fully the context and the necessity and the reasoning behind a lot of our zoning changes, not just text amendments. There is currently a program that we're starting up called Engage Durham, which is a community engagement program specifically for our new comprehensive plan. The comp plan hasn't been revised for several years. This is going to be a multi-year process that will hire local residents as ambassadors to go out into the community and work with residents to learn more about the comprehensive plan and to gather feedback and make sure everyone really understands what's happening. So that's one project that we'll be working on, not just for text amendments, but for the zoning code at large. We also have a planning academy that is open to all residents. People can come, and for several weeks, they meet with planners and they learn a little bit about how planning and zoning works. I think that program is really great. Excited about continuing that and making that opportunity available to more residents as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Caballero.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, our zoning code text amendment is extremely dense and technical and hard to understand, not just for residents, but for actual builders and planners and architects. I'm married to an architect, and it's been very illuminating to see how he has to interact. I will also say that Durham has an easier place to develop than, say, Morrisville or Chapel Hill. So I do want to put that into context. I'm actually really excited about the comp plan. I know that even just with hiring the consultant to do initial outreach, they were extremely intentional about how they were going to do it. They were taking that idea of equitable engagement seriously. I know that they have included and thought through multi-language components to it. How are they going to engage with people who are non-English speakers? And so I think it is a great opportunity to see how residents can engage and will engage in the future, and my hope is that it will become easier and less technical, because I think it is a true need. Also, the Planning Academy gets full very quickly, and I know that there has been discussion about running more often so that more residents can apply and learn. The residents I know who have done it have said it has been extremely helpful, and it's one of the things that I hear pretty often people are excited about.
Thank you. To the challengers, you've heard about the comprehensive plan from the incumbents. The planning department is writing a new comprehensive plan, which will take a few years. City planners have expressed a commitment to engage a wide audience. If elected, how would you ensure that the city has a strong public engagement process during this rewrite of the comprehensive plan? And I'll start with Ms. Wagstaff.
First, we would go back to implementing some things that we used to do a long time ago, and right now, those things have been taken out of context. We would go back to having coffee with council. Those were the meetings that the council would have in the community with the residents of each district. We have 5 districts. These coffee with council sessions were designed so that we could get input directly from people in the community that would be directly impacted by decisions or whatever it is that was coming up that would affect them. We have to bring back the things that work. One of the things that this council has been good at is getting rid of the things that work and implementing things that cause harm to the community. And I want to see those things brought back. So I definitely want to see us get back to going into the community, having those one-on-one conversations. And as far as this new expanding housing choice, I really wanted to say something on that. One thing about that was that it is, for me, hard to understand how you allow developers to help you write an expanding housing choice plan. That's like putting the fox in the hen house. You cannot have a plan being implemented or written by a group of people that they're gonna write it to have the curve benefit them. Again, the residents are never included in these processes until after processes have been implemented. And then you bring us to the table, and it's probably only when we come down to City Hall when they have the public hearing. So we have to stop that.
Thank you, Ms. Wagstaff. Mr. Meyer?
I think you said it best where you said, make sure you take time. Don't do this thing in a rush. Don't say, hey, we've got to do it now. Community engagement is one of those things it's real easy to say we're going to do, but it is hard to implement. Look at these elections. We had 9% turnout. We're all trying to get more. We can't even engage 91% of Durham in an election, let alone this planning process. So I think one of the things you have to do is make sure you do take your time. Make sure you go into the same areas more than once. Don't say, hey, we're going to go meet with this group on this day, on this month, and then 6 months later say, well, we've already met with them. We're not going back. You have to do it more than once. You have to push to engage. The neighborhood ambassadors are a good idea. Work with groups like this group that represents the neighborhoods and things like that. Talk to the homeowners associations, talk to the DHA properties, and make sure they have multiple opportunities to be heard. Make sure you take your time, make sure you listen. That's what you have to do. Community engagement requires getting out there and actually meeting with the folks, going to them, coffee with the council, or show up at the homeowners meetings, show up at various events more than once. Don't just say, hey, come all the way down to City Hall, find parking, and we'll meet with you, and we've done it this one time. So I think you have to do it as a deliberate process, and you do it by constantly going in there and doing it more than once. You know, go to the communities more than once and take your time to make sure it's done right.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Mr. Gunn?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, one of the things that I said at the top of my introduction is that I feel like we're doing a poor job of ensuring that everyone's voice is heard in Durham. And I think the EHC process is a really good example of that. I think our elected officials do a really good job of engaging us when they want our vote or when they have to use our votes to make a decision, but they do a fairly poor job of engaging us when they don't need our vote to make a decision. And I think more community engagement centered around the policies that we pass, specifically the engagement of people who are going to be directly impacted, should happen at the very beginning. As Ms. Wagstaff said, instead of having developers at the table planning this ordinance that's going to directly impact neighborhood members should be guiding and leading the operation or the meetings. Another thing that I think is important, during elections, how many of you all have received an election flyer in your mail thus far? Someone asking for your vote or for you to vote for a bond? Okay, same people raising your hands. How many of you received a flyer asking you what you thought about EHC? Exactly. When elected officials want our vote, they know how to find us, right? They know how to engage us when they want our vote. When they're going to make a decision that's going to directly impact us, they're not in our communities. They're not in our communities, and they're not engaging us. That's what I would advocate for, and that's what I represent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce the second member of the panel, Mr. John Rooks, Jr.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Testing, okay.
It's on, man. It's on.
Yeah. I'm supposed to be using this lapel mic, though. I'm a little taller. This is a two-part question. Okay? What is your policy recommendations toward reducing crime in Durham in short and in long term? This is specifically to police. We're going to start with you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you for the question. I'm sorry, so the two-part is just short-term and long-term?
Yes.
Great. So in the short term, I'm really excited about the planned community safety task force that the city and the county are now collaborating to create. We are getting community engagement, community feedback on the solutions that we think would be, that community members think would be most effective in Durham. We're also looking at processes that have worked in other communities to reduce crime by focusing on prevention, intervention, and reentry rather than continuing to put all of our resources into enforcement. In the long term, I think the answers are pretty clear. The communities that are the safest are the communities that have the most resources. And so providing everyone with an affordable place to live, a quality education in a good school, an economic, social, and really an educational and like a opportunity to have fun, right? Those recreational opportunities that groups like Parks and Rec and our nonprofit organizations provide. Those are the key pieces to giving someone a good life, such that they feel at home in a community and don't feel the need to engage in antisocial activities like crime. Short-term, prevention, intervention. In the long term, make everyone's life better in our community. Thank you.
Mr. Myers?
I think short-term, you've got to support law enforcement. Durham has been growing at a rate of about 13 people a day for the last several years. To keep the staffing levels the same way they would have been 4 years ago, we needed 82 officers. The chief, nationally recognized, hired by this city council, making great strides in Durham for progressive policing and changing a lot of things, wanted to ask for 72. That was knocked to 18. There was a compromise to 9, and then they were given 0. Yet, even the incumbents have acknowledged more police in the short term could provide extra safety. A planned task force that we're hoping to implement isn't a short-term solution. That's part of the long-term solution. That being said, more law enforcement, support for law enforcement, we do need to make sure that they don't over-police, that we don't return to those days, and Durham is making great strides in that area. We have a very good chief, very good leadership making sure it works. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I'm used to holding them accountable, and that's what we need to keep doing. Short term, we need more law enforcement. Long term, the goals are the same. We need to invest in the communities. We need the reintegration programs. We need economic development, transportation, housing. You need the rec centers and things like that. I think the community task force, all of this stuff is great for the long term so we can help reduce the crime. But we need to recognize police are a short-term solution. You're not going to police your way out of it, but they're also our partners in the long term. They're not our enemies. They're not the most dangerous people on the street with guns. So we need to take a comprehensive approach which includes law enforcement and community investment.
Ms. Cavallari?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. So I think that short-term, as well, I am extremely excited about the task force. I think putting resources into things like violence interrupter programs are really, really key. I think that more collaboration with the county and our school systems is also key in the short term. I know that a lot of the violence that we see, we don't necessarily have the best access to our schools and the supports that some of these kids have with guidance counselors. And I think that collaboration is going to be extremely important if we're ever going to actually do more systemic change, which is what I think we're all in agreement about the long term up here. We know that affordable housing, better healthcare, better schools, all of that will improve our quality of life in Durham. So I don't think there's any disagreement on the long terms. It's just where do you spend the money now? I will say that we don't include these things, but things like eviction diversion, the DEER program, that's also crime prevention. When you restore somebody's driver's license, when you help them get rid of old fees and fines, you let them have an opportunity to get a job again. That is crime prevention, and we've done a tremendous amount of work around that and made a tremendous amount of progress around that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm actually going to jump to,
Would you like me to answer that too?
I'm actually going to jump to another question. It's still in regards to police, and this is actually a 3-part question.
I'm gonna have to start taking these down.
Can the others not have the opportunity to address the police question?
This is actually another police question.
Oh, okay.
And trust me, you're going to need all your time on this one.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay?
I just would like to say that
I was just wondering,
I think it would be
can speak
appropriate.
for me. I was wondering, would you like me to answer the question that every other candidate answered a minute ago? Or
I also didn't answer it. Either
that's
me or Ms. Wagstaff got to answer it. Can we possibly address that
Like
question?
that? Sure.
Yeah.
Ms. Wagstaff?
Mr. Gunn, you want to go first? Okay. The short term for me would be more police officers. The long term would be to invest in the things that they stopped investing in. I was the first one that mentioned about the Parks and Rec investment. Parks and Rec is probably one of the most underfunded departments in this city. There are things that we need to be investing in the Parks and Rec that would keep some of these youth off the street right now that are committing the most heinous crimes in Durham. I know this because I'm in these streets every day. I know who's committing these crimes. We have to invest in the programs that we had before, the night flight, where we had teenagers that were able to stay in gyms most of the night, and that kept them out of the street and out of trouble. All of the programs that you heard them speak about, eviction diversion, the driver's restoration, those are county programs. Any one of those interrupted programs, those are county initiatives. Now, the city may invest some funds in it, but those are county initiatives. For the city of Durham, the only program that they have that has anything to do with restoration of a person's life would be their Welcome Home program. That's the one where they give you a letter from the mayor when you come out of prison from long incarcerations, and they give you a bag of toiletries. But they don't give you the keys to an apartment or a job that says you can stay here until we stabilize you. These are the things that we have to do. We have to be real about how do we handle these problems. These are the things that we cannot continue to sit here and put a Band-Aid on and say it's okay.
Thank you. Mr. Gunn?
Yeah, thank you for allowing us to answer. I think we are in a crisis of public safety. I mentioned at the beginning, it's my most urgent priority to address the safety of everyone in Durham. I think the short-term solution is very, very clear. We have a nationally recognized police chief. We have a police chief that's evolved our policing strategy to do everything that council said we needed police to do. Implement more de-escalation techniques, implement better training on implicit bias, implement crisis response services that are not putting people in the criminal justice system for mental health and substance abuse issues. Our police chief has done everything that they've asked her to do, and when she stands up and asks for what she needs to do her job, they still say no. Even amidst a compromise. So you'll hear them probably say that the reason why they chose not to support our police chief is because they chose to prioritize a living wage for all city employees. It's disingenuous to tell us that we have to choose between a living wage and safety in our community. We can do both, and in that very meeting, Councilwoman Johnson was asked, would you accept a compromise if we were able to both do a living wage? How many officers would you accept? And Councilwoman Johnson responded, 0. So it's less about math and less about logic and rationale, and it's more about ideology. And that's problematic across the spectrum on our council. We're governing out of ideology instead of practical solutions for our community and what our city actually needs. People are dying in our city. People are being shot in our city every single day. We need law enforcement to respond today. We also need to focus on job growth, job creation to address the economic conditions that are causing crime. But today, we need law enforcement to be properly resourced to respond. And as your council person, that's what I'll do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. There is a division in Durham regarding more police officers. What would you propose to those who do not prefer police officers? Yes. Okay. And how do you encourage reconciliation between those opposing views? And Mr. Wagstaff, we'll start with you again.
Could you repeat that last part? As I was.
Can you hear me better now? Okay, thank you. I'll repeat the question for you.
Okay, go ahead.
There is a division in Durham regarding more police officers. What would you propose to those who do not prefer an expansion? As well as how do you encourage reconciliation between those or people with opposing views?
Well, what I would propose to the people that believe that we should not hire any more police officers, I would say go talk to Zion, 9-year-old, who was murdered on the streets of Durham by gun violence. Talk to those parents. Talk to Khalil, who was killed by violence. Talk to those people who have been affected by senseless violence in Durham that may have been avoided if there had been a black and white driving down the street at the time. So while I understand that people have opposing views, and I know that a lot of time it's based on your upbringing, we have to understand that sometimes our views get in the way of common sense and good thinking. One of the things I do understand is that when these parents and these loved ones are suffering out here from the death, the violence that's going on, and there was just a shooting the other night, well, 4 actually the other night, they don't want to hear about your numbers and your statistics. All they want to know is, what are you going to do about this? And I think that what we have to do is we have to look at that even though we can disagree on that, we still have to find a middle ground where we can find common practices. And one of the common practices, when you're talking about violent crime and how to interrupt it, we have to understand that. I'll get to that later.
Understand. Thank you. Mr. Gunn?
Yeah, thank you. So as a black man in the United States of America, I'm very inherently knowledgeable about the complex relationship between police and our communities. And I completely understand why someone may feel like they don't want more police in their community based on a history of systemic racism, based on a implicit bias in our policing system. You asked me how I would reconcile that, right? I've had lots of conversations with folks on the other side of this debate, people who I have a great deal of respect for, including many members of the Durham Beyond Policing Coalition. And what we talked about was, if we don't want more police, what solutions can we give people today? And where we landed was, we don't have a today solution. So right now, what our community needs is a today solution. And the consensus in that room was that that's right. As we prepare to build a community safety task force, as we prepare to evolve our policing strategy, we have to do something today for these people who are dying. So when you talk about reconciling it, as we work to repair many of the wounds that over-policing or over-militarization of policing has caused for communities of color, we also must recognize we have to move forward. We have a chief that's committed to that. I don't know if you all got the chance to watch her at Duke Chapel, but she talked at length about the things that she's doing in the Durham Police Department to evolve our policing strategy and work with community members to restore trust so that they can keep us safe, right? And when we have someone like that, I think we have to empower her and support her and give her what she needs to do her job, and also give people the resources to empower communities to keep each other safe. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and solution. That's how we reconcile it, by being practical and giving people what they need, and that's safety in our community.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
So I should probably just answer the second half of that question, the reconciliation piece, right? Because I think my first answer, I understand that, sir. I think my answer to the last question answered the first part of the question, which
Sure.
is alternatives to policing. So how to reconcile with people with opposing views. I think the community safety process of building that task force will be an excellent example of a way to do that. We are planning to put people on that task force from a variety of different communities here in Durham, with a variety of different views on how to keep our community safe. And what we're hopeful will come out of that task force is a consensus about how we should move forward here in Durham. That will be an opportunity for people with very different ideas about policing, with very different ideas about what safety means, with very different ideas about how we get to where we all want to be in Durham, which is a community where everyone feels safe, to work together, to collaborate, and to come up with solutions. I think that opportunity will be a first step toward building a safety strategy that most of the folks in our community will be excited about, and looking forward to moving forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer?
I think one of the main things you need to do is discuss with them what the concerns are. Make sure that they understand not to apply national police problems to Durham. It wasn't Durham police who killed an unarmed black man in his apartment in Dallas. It wasn't the Durham Police Department who killed a black woman in her home in Fort Worth. Both those officers have been rightly charged with murder. One was convicted. It wasn't Durham police who killed Tamir Rice. It wasn't Durham police who killed Laquan McDonald. It wasn't them who killed Michael Scott. We need to focus on what we're doing here in Durham. Show we have a progressive chief. We have a good chief who's making a lot of training. If you look at the communities now, we've re-engaged the housing units. We now call them the community engagement units, but they're there for security. They're not there to police. They're not there to over-police. But go into DHA property and they will tell you when the community engagement units are there, kids are using the playgrounds. Neighbors are sitting out on their front porches. They're walking and using the streets because the officers, their mere presence is keeping people safe. They're not stopping somebody for driving down the street. They're not stopping someone for scootering on the sidewalk. They're not there for policing. They're there for security. As soon as they leave, the drug dealers take over. We need to educate them and work with them on rebuilding the trust rather than saying it's an us versus them, police are evil. The police are our partners. That's how you reconcile it. Find out what their concerns are, but also make sure they know you are going to hold the police accountable. Again, my job as a criminal defense attorney, if the police overstep the lines, even though my wife's a cop and a lot of my friends are, I'm one of the first ones to hold them accountable and say that's not acceptable. We need to make sure we can show that.
Ms. Caballero?
Yeah, thank you. So this is hard, obviously. This is a question that has ripped open our community. I think that moving forward, the task force will be the first place where we start. It will not be the end point. I think we do have to have a lot of conversations. I think people who are not all in alignment with their views will have to be in a room together, and I think it's gonna be really, really hard and painful, and I don't think there's another way around that. For the folks who are talking about our Durham Housing Authority communities, I do often wonder, so if the crime comes back after the police leave, so is the idea then we would have 24-hour police surveillance there? Because I think that to me is an example of an extension. And so those are the questions I know I have. If that's what's happening in McDougal Terrace after the police leave, so what's the answer to that question? Are we suggesting that those people need to be monitored 24 hours a day? I know that those are the ideological and actually, quite frankly, fiscal conversations I know I have. How much of our budget is going to continue going to our police department? 50% already goes to both the fire and police, but if I'm not mistaken, 60% of that goes to our police department. And so it does often become a resource question. If we often also hear our sidewalks are not at the level that people want. Our streets are also not at the level that people want. Our parks are also not at the level that people want. And we have fixed resources. So at some point, we have to make really hard choices. And I know that I believe that in a city that, thanks.
Thank you.
Carterson.
So I have a transportation question, and actually we would have three people answer it, and then I'll add a little bit to the people for the second half, so they're not so boring to have to go back and repeat what other people said. So starting with Mr. Meyer, with the demise of the light rail proposal, we need new options to increase mobility and to decrease congestion. What do you see as the city's next steps to offer safe mobility that is affordable to all?
I think that is a good question, and that's definitely one of the issues that we need to grow. We need to work on our bus system and some of our alternative transportations. Without the light rail, obviously that would have done some, although I think the thing that hurt the light rail is it connected UNC, Duke, and NCCU, didn't connect RTP, didn't connect Raleigh. We need to focus on expanding the bus system. One of the problems is we can create all the jobs we want. If people can't get to those jobs, they don't keep those jobs. So we need to look at the transportation studies. I think even in some of these other neighborhoods, as you increase the density near the jobs, try to relocate the jobs and the housing close to where the residents are. You know, try to get, for DHA property, we have stuff near there. Encourage businesses to relocate there so people can get the transportation. But we do need to look at our overall structure and make sure that the bus routes are good, make sure they're effective, make sure that they're efficient. Because right now the problem is you can take a bus. Again, I work in the court systems, and I can't tell you how many times people are late because there's one bus that runs every hour, and if they miss it, they're done. They have to show up. So we need to take a comprehensive approach and look and take that money rather than go look and spend another $100 million on light rail. See what we can do to fix our bus system. See what we can do to fix our transportation infrastructure so that it connects all parts of Durham. We have whole neighborhoods that have no functional bus routes. And that's one of the problems. So that's what our next step needs to be, is the larger bus routes and things like that. And then obviously keep options open for the future as new things come up or new opportunities arise. We need to look at that, but right now we need to fix the busing.
Ms. Caballero.
Thank you for the question. So I know that our planning department is actually leading our next transit plan along with Go Triangle, and I'm actually really excited about that because it's lining up really well with our comprehensive plan. And so if we think about land use and transit, if we don't have that interplay and we don't have a real consistent, expansive view of it, we're going to fail again. And so I'll say that I know that that's the work that staff is already doing. And again, just like with our comprehensive plan, they want deep resident engagement, because that was one of the criticisms around light rail that I know I've heard, that the engagement around it was not great. Moving forward, I think that in the short term, absolutely increasing the frequency of our buses, where they go, et cetera, is extremely important. We know that there will be, between Raleigh and Durham, eventually a commuter rail, and so that's going to be one other component. And then, quite frankly, when we're thinking about transit, we have to think multimodal. We have to think about our bike infrastructure. We have to think about our sidewalk infrastructure, because we want people to get around in as many ways as possible. I know one of the things I know I'm curious about, and this is I think, longer term, but I often wonder if we were able to partner with Durham Public Schools and put our high school students on city buses. I know the city buses often they already go to Southern, they already go to Hillside, they already go to Riverside. And Northern, the new Northern High School will actually be in city limits and much closer in. If we are able to put our high school students on buses, it will be a way to partner, it will be a way to help alleviate funding constrictions on DPS side, and then we actually create an entire generation of mass transit users right there. Thank you.
So, thank you. Ms. Wagstaff.
I think that Daniel hit it on the head. We need to improve the bus system that we currently have in place. We need to have red lines. There are areas in the county that they have no options when it comes to transportation other than having a vehicle. We have to create some red line ideas where we have special bus routes that go to certain areas of Durham, including Riverside, Northern, those outlying areas. Also, we already have high school kids that ride the bus. I've raised 3 young men in this city, and every school they went to, they rode Durham Public. They didn't ride Durham Public School bus, they rode the city bus. So that's already in place. That's not something we have to look at. Our high school kids catch the city bus now, and they actually get a free pass to do that. But we have to look at creating some routes for outlying areas to bring the county people back into, because even with the light rail, in its conception before it failed, they were talking about why should the taxpayers out there have to assume this debt when they would not be entitled to anything they would not benefit anything from that light rail. There was no light, there was no hubs, there was no parking rides, anything that accommodated county people. So we have to look at what we already have in place, and we have to make what we have in place work for everybody. We cannot create a 2 transportation system, and we have to improve on the trails and the bike lanes and the parks, but we have to make sure that this system we have right now functions well.
So, Mr. Gunn, you're welcome to continue talking about public transit, but also many Durham citizens are interested in making the city more walkable and multiplying the number of safe options for cyclists. What can be done to create non-automotive mobility options for all of our citizens?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. I think that's a fairly short answer, right? I think we should dedicate more bike lanes, and there's actually some different ways to approach bike lanes rather than having them on the shoulder of a road. There's some other strategies to put bike lanes sort of protected in between traffic so that they're not so vulnerable for cars. So I think we should look at some more innovative ways to create bike lanes that actually cut down on traffic and also make our cyclists safer. I think obviously improving our sidewalk infrastructure. I actually lived downtown, and it was a couple that were walking around trying to find a baseball stadium a couple weeks ago, and they were trying to walk around the loop, and there's no sidewalk on the loop, which is really dangerous. And so he's like, "Where's the stadium?" I was like, "Well, it's actually there, but the safest way, you got to go all the way under a bridge and wrap all the way around." And I think so improving our sidewalk infrastructure is important. But if I may also talk about public transit. So I think the next solution for Durham for public transit is bus rapid transit. So it's a step further than just improving our existing bus line. It's actually creating dedicated bus lines on an elevated platform. At the Chamber of Commerce, which is where my day job is as vice president there, we organized a group of city leaders to go to Richmond, Virginia and see their bus rapid transit system. It works really well. Richmond's a similar size city, similar demographically and economically to Durham as well. It works really well and it's really efficient, and it can be implemented at a fraction of a cost to something like light rail. It's worth noting that we invited all of our city leaders to that trip, and none of them attended. So I think we have to start looking at what's working in other cities and be serious about providing solutions for Durham that actually work and do what we're elected to do.
And Ms. Johnson?
Thank you for the question. I think it's clear, post light rail, what we're left with primarily is buses. The questions are where we need more bus routes. I think expanding more bus service into the further out parts of the city and the county is really important, especially as we're seeing more development and growth in those areas. Another key point is bus shelters. We have a real need for more bus shelters here in Durham, and we're working on building a number of those, but they're pretty expensive, they take a while, and so we've got to put those in the pipeline so that we're constantly building them and getting more people comfortable riding the bus. Not only do we need more routes, we need more buses on our current routes. Right now, if you are trying to take the bus to work and you know there's not going to be another bus for 30 minutes or an hour, you can't really work that into your day. Having a quicker 10 or 15-minute headway is much more usable for people, and it'll get more people on the bus. We have one more rail option, the commuter rail to Raleigh, which we are going to be working on over the next few years. That's going to cut down a lot on traffic in that I-40, I-440, and 540 corridor, and that's really critical for the future growth as well. With regard to sidewalks and bike infrastructure, I think getting people out of their cars and using more sustainable forms of transportation is really crucial. Walking and biking, of course, are also healthier for us and will improve public health. I support the Bike Durham proposal for a low-stress protected bike lane network throughout the city and support continuing to invest more each year in our sidewalk infrastructure as we've been doing for the past several years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. We have got a few questions from the audience, and I'd like to sort of collapse some of them. This question is meant for Ms. Johnson and Ms. Caballero, but I think they would apply to all of the candidates. Essentially, the question is, what is your working definition of gentrification? It is a term many use, but few understand. And there is a follow-up of that. So if you could be brief on that, I can go up on the next question. So essentially, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Caballero, and then I'll go to the five of you with the next question, which is about gentrification.
Sure. So gentrification is a process by which communities, mostly people of color and low income, who have suffered from decades of disinvestment, largely in center city communities, are being replaced by more affluent and white communities who are attempting to return to the city. So I think key to the idea of displacement, of the idea of gentrification, is displacement, that people are being forced to leave the communities that they live in now and push to other areas of the city.
Ms. Caballero.
Yeah, to add to that, along with it, I also attach gentrification with the idea of suburbanization of our city centers. So as we have seen folks who want the amenities of city centers, they don't necessarily have the experiences of what does it mean to be living in a denser place where there's more people, where there's potentially more noise. And so they create a animosity sometimes with their neighbors because there's a cultural kind of squashing of what was there before for something, newer and what they're used to, and not necessarily becoming part of the community and kind of overseeing what their views or what their ideas of what a neighborhood should be.
Thanks. So this is going to be to all of you, and I'm going to start with Mr. Gunn. It's rather long, but let me go. The South Side revitalization was advertised as an affordable housing endeavor, but has turned into what may be considered city-sponsored gentrification. The Planning Commission and Coalition for Affordable Housing and Transit warn that the EHC would increase displacement in already gentrifying neighborhoods. These warnings were not heeded by council. What are your plans to curb gentrification? Mr. Gunn.
Yeah, great question. And thank you for that. Was that an audience question or yours?
No, this came from the audience.
Thank you very much for that question. Very well thought out. I think first we need to talk about process, right? We need to talk about including people, including the neighborhoods that are going to be directly impacted in the decision-making process, and listening to them. It's one thing to have people stand up and say, hey, this is gonna increase gentrification. It's another thing to actually listen to them. And in terms of what my plans would be to curb gentrification, it's twofold. I think we need to address affordability by creating a diverse range of housing stock throughout our city. I think we're overemphasizing downtown today when we have a vast city, and we should create a diverse mix of housing opportunities. We also have to create economic development opportunities for people to lift themselves up out of poverty, eliminate barriers to those opportunities, meaning creating jobs, create workforce development programs to train people for the jobs, and also eliminate systemic barriers for those jobs. I think that enables people to connect better to the Durham economy and benefit from some of the growth in a way that doesn't displace so many people. But I think the other side of that is necessary to have rational and practical affordable housing measures. and work with the community so that these things are not happening to community members, but they're happening with community members, right? And people can have input. The last thing that I think is important for us to do as it relates to Southside and other communities that have been city-sponsored gentrification is to create programs to offset the increased property taxes for people in neighborhoods that have been gentrified, and therefore they're being sort of displaced because they can no longer afford to pay their property tax. We have the ability as a city to provide grants to offset those costs when the city causes gentrification or when there's unintended consequences of development, and I think we need to prioritize that for our seniors and our longtime homeowners in Durham. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you for the question. I think the first thing that we need to do is pass the housing bond. That's going to provide the affordable housing in our downtown core, which is one of the quickest gentrifying areas in Durham, provide more housing for low-income people there, as well as more housing to meet the needs of our existing housing shortage. The EHC, though the question implied that it would increase gentrification, actually has the opportunity to reduce gentrification. It allows us to build smaller units in our urban core, which are more likely to be affordable by design. It allows people to build larger backyard cottages up to 800 square feet that are likely to stay affordable long-term. And so I'm also excited about some elements of the housing plan that will help homeowners access financing to build accessory dwelling units in their yards. Right now, it's very difficult to finance that if you just don't have the money already. And so figuring out how to help people finance those to create more affordable housing. We also need to focus on economic development. And of course, we know the more money you make, the more you can afford. And so bringing more high-paying jobs to Durham, continuing to fight for higher minimum wages at the state level is something that we all need to do. And of course, at the city level, we've raised our wages and now raised the wages of every city employee up to a minimum of $15.46 an hour. So economic development, build more housing, and of course, pass the housing bond, build more affordable housing.
Mr. Mayor?
I think one of the things you need to do is make sure that we do take care of the long-term homeowners and also encourage some of the home ownership. One of the big problems with gentrification is either the people who are long-term homeowners but don't want to sell, when these houses are going up around them, their property taxes are double, tripling, quadrupling. So that's where you need to work with grants and stuff to let long-term homeowners stay in. You also need to make sure that people have an opportunity to buy the homes that they're in, because the other issue with gentrification is a lot of the folks in these neighborhoods that are being gentrified are long-term tenants. And so the problem is they don't take advantage of gentrification, their landlord does. If you're a homeowner, you can decide to sell. It's not necessarily a bad thing to say, hey, my property values went way up. You need help on the taxes if you want to stay, you can have the ability to sell. It's when you're a tenant that you can get booted out just because the landlord says, you know, this is what I want to do, I want to sell it. So I think we need to focus on that. The expanded housing choices, I think, you know, the issue with that's going to be, you know, now you can be able to just gentrify more duplexes, I think, and even building more affordable housing downtown, that's just going to increase the density. We still need the resources, and it's just going to make it more and more people move in. I don't know how it stops gentrification to say, well, you can't move into this neighborhood, we're going to let that gentrify, but we'll move you to this neighborhood here. You need to focus on long-term homeowners, helping them out, and then, again, helping the people with the property taxes. Gentrification is going to happen. You just need to try to minimize the impacts on the residents that are there and give them opportunities to stay for as long as they can.
Ms. Caballero?
Thank you for the question. So I do also believe that passing the bond will be our first really important step to fighting gentrification, partly because it does expand the city tax program already. We're already pushing the county to get on board as well because that will have a bigger impact. So your property tax bill, 40% goes to the city, 60% goes to the county. So if they're not participating, it's just not as big a relief as it could be. So again, that collaboration with the county is going to be crucial to its success. There was also more outreach within the bond. Part of the 5-year housing strategy includes more outreach to let residents know about the state programs that there already are to help folks offset their property taxes. And then another part of the bond is helping homeowners with weatherization and home repair. And this is explicitly designed to help some of our elderly homeowners who can't really afford to fix up their houses and then are sometimes forced to sell at prices that aren't good for them. It helps the developer, it doesn't really help the homeowner. As far as expanding housing choice, I think part of it we have to look at is when we're talking about for-profit building, The trickier, and this goes back to the text amendment and everything that kind of we started with, the harder you make it to build, that gets passed on to the consumer. So if we don't have a land policy that is flexible, that lets people access it easily, not just residents, but folks who are building houses, they will pass that on. A designer, thanks.
Ms. Westhoff?
First of all, let me explain what my definition is of gentrification. It's called economic ethnic cleansing. That's how I see gentrification. You never see non-minority communities gentrify. It's always poor minority communities that are always assume that in order to make things better, you have to come in and change the whole exterior, including the people that live in those communities. So we have to get rid of them so that we can make this community better. What I believe that Southside has taught us, it has become a teaching tool for what not to do if you're sitting on this council that created the problem that you've created for the displacement of most of the residents that lived in Southside. There's one thing that this council always claims that they can't do. Most of the time when you talk about doing things to prevent certain things, and we want to slow down gentrification, there's a little something called inclusionary zoning. Even though I've heard them time and time say the state won't allow it, I did my research and went over to the state. There's nothing in their constitution or their charters that say it can't be tried. Durham claims to be the most progressive and most liberal place in North Carolina. This is something that could be used, and if it is a problem, then test it in the courts, but do it anyway. That's when you ask developers to make sure that if they want to come in here and build 400 properties, 400 units, they have to give us a certain amount of units as affordable and keep them affordable. So we need to stop saying what we can't do and do things and then test it in the courts if we're as progressive as they say they are.
Thank you, Ms. Wagstaff. Now we're going to have another round of one question each from the panelists, and I have more questions from the audience that I like to ask. Akram?
This next question relates to something that Mr. Meyer alluded to earlier, which is that voter turnout in local elections is often really low. Some Durham residents cannot vote. Other residents choose not to vote. So how would you try to increase voter turnout? And secondly, how would you ensure that you represent those who choose not to or who cannot vote? And because, Mr. Meyer, you mentioned it, I'll let you start.
Okay. I think one of the ways you encourage turnout is you do have to remind people of the low turnout. What you always hear right now, it's everyone assumes that there's one PAC that controls everything and my vote doesn't matter. You need to explain to them, first of all, that PAC didn't always control. That's a more recent phenomenon. And one of the reasons the PACs do control is because of the low turnout. So you have to try to reach out to the people who don't think their vote matters. One of the issues is, like with this is a nonpartisan race. You need to explain to people, that means you can all vote. It's not like our DA race, our sheriff race, and so many of our other races that are decided in the Democratic primary, and then there's no opposition. So I think you need to reach out to a lot of those groups, and you just need to, try to do education, Facebook, do mailers. It's like Josh said, when they want to reach us for campaigns, they can do it. When they want to reach us for other things, they can't. So I think you just need to focus and educate people that your vote really does matter. 13,000 votes is going to get someone on this city council. That's it, out of 180,000 people. You need to remind people and let them know that really is all it takes. I think in a longer term solution, I know one thing that's been proposed that I've heard and I'm actually not opposed to, and I know there's arguments, is move the city council races to the even years so that we're actually at the higher turnout ones as well. Because right now, we're the only thing, especially for the primary, it was us. So I think you've just got to remind people these low turnouts is why the special interest control, and then let's look at moving to the same election cycle as everyone else, which then gives us greater turnout.
Thank you. Ms. Caballero?
Thank you for the question. So I think that one of the things that I know I was super excited about was our participatory budgeting process. And the reason we did it at the level that we did, which was anyone who was a city resident, 13 or over, could vote. And it was to create an opportunity for both our youth to get in early, learn about it, and for folks who cannot vote to be able to participate. We had city staff in our jail going there to make sure people could vote. We had city staff and volunteers in almost every single middle school and high school in Durham to help the kids, our youth, who are our future voters, and quite frankly, our future period, get engaged and understand how to be a citizen. And so that's something I know that was one of the reasons that I was excited about it and also pushed for the age that it was. Secondly, I will say that I'm not opposed to the idea of moving city council races to even years. I think it especially because of lower turnout, it makes sense. I think that part of the issue with that is that we would have to get approval from the General Assembly, so I am reticent to approach the General Assembly that we have right now with any of those kinds of changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wagstaff?
I think there are some innovative ways where we can get people engaged in voting. But one of the things we have to understand is that the same zest and zealous that they put into the $2.5 million participatory budgeting, they need to put it into this voting to educate people about voting. They can't tell people who to vote for, but they can use that same type of vigor that they use to make sure that the schools knew, that 13-year-olds knew they could vote. We go out and just to hear that they went into the jails, I hope that they go into the jails now and let these people that have not been adjudicated yet, am I right, Mr. Myers? That they are still voting members of this population. They are only been accused at this point. So one of the things that I see with low voter turnout is that a lot of people don't live in Durham. I stand out there 17 days at a poll, and I ask 10 people a day that's walking down the block. And out of those 10 people, at least 5 of them say, I don't live in Durham, but they work for Durham. They work here. And part of our problem is we have a lot of situations where we don't have the people here to actually vote. And low voter turnout is always good for an incumbent. And so that's why we may not get that zealous and that overwhelming effect to get people out to vote, because the lower the turnout, the better it is for an incumbent. So what we have to do, we have to be the vocal ones, the candidates that are running, we have to be the vocal ones and make sure that people turn out.
Thank you. Mr. Gunn?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, that's obviously probably the challenge for all of us up here, especially the challengers, right? Because, you know, in elections, incumbents depend on a low turnout to win, right? Especially when it's controlled by special interests the way that elections have been for the past few cycles here in Durham. I think one of our biggest challenges is engaging the younger. If you look at the data, 18 to 35 is our lowest voter block, even though it's one of the largest percentages of our population here in Durham. When I was a kid, the sort of story about, you know, someone died for you to vote, so you should vote, used to work. What I'm finding in my sort of get out the vote efforts and meeting with younger members of our community is that no longer works. So I think we have to change our messaging and explain to people why it matters and what actually happens on council. I think one of the issues that's really galvanizing people is the safety issue in Durham and the fact that council can have a direct impact on that, right? And more directly than voting for the president or voting for the U.S. Senate, we have to explain to folks why it matters and specifically what issues are going to impact you individually, because local elections can change your life quickly, right, in a way that you know, national elections may not. So I think it's about changing our messaging and also identifying what issues matter to folks. Oftentimes we go into communities and we say, hey, vote for me, here's why, rather than saying, hey, what issues are most important to you? Here's my perspective on those. If that resonates with you, I hope to earn your vote. Even if I don't, please go out and let your voice be heard. Because I think it is, you know, shameful to have a 9% turnout, right, in a city that considers itself progressive and a robust democracy that we brag about. 9% is not very robust.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I think the two main ways to increase turnout are structural changes to our election system. Our turnout's low primarily for 2 reasons. Our elections are in off years and our elections are nonpartisan. Nonpartisan elections generally attract fewer voters, and of course off-year elections generally attract fewer voters. I think there are good arguments for moving our elections to even years. I also think there are good arguments for not doing that, but if the goal is to increase turnout, that would be the way to do it. Another thing that I think we all need to be doing as candidates and just as people who are interested in democracy is knocking doors. That's the way you get people out to vote. You meet people face to face. You get them interested in what's happening in the city. Door-to-door canvassing is by far the most effective way to engage people. And so I would recommend that, you know, not just us, but us primarily, but also community organizations, anybody who just, you know, wants to increase civic engagement in the community, go out and knock some doors.
Thank you.
Mr. Myers? I'm going to start with you. How do you define shared prosperity, and how is that factored into the next 4 years of your term in office?
wouldn't be the next 4 years, it would be the first 4 years, but, I mean, I think with the shared prosperity, we need to remember that we're all in this together. Durham is in it together. We need to make sure that we don't just take care of the people at the top. I hear both Mayor Schul and Mr. Williams, Sylvester Williams, talk about it as well. We need to make sure that we bring up the bottom, that we have the things. One of the things we talked about at a forum, they're talking a lot about how this housing bond, that they have a black female developer out of Charlotte. And that's great. We need to make sure we do that we go with the black and the minority businesses, but we also need to make sure that they're hiring local, because you don't get shared prosperity by hiring a group out of Atlanta to do construction, bringing their crews with them. So we need to make sure that we focus on local Durham as well for the shared prosperity, for the transportation issues and things like that, because that's really what it is we need to make sure that we invest, as we grow these jobs, as we grow the economic development, that we're encouraging people to hire within Durham, people to hire DHA property, doing the job training, redoing Durham Tech so they actually can do more and more of it. And that's what I would focus on, is to make sure that we encourage people. Right now, obviously, you have to make sure you get the training and you get the employee base there and ready, but that's as you fix the transportation infrastructure, as you fix the housing, as you fix the other things, we can start making sure that not only are we bringing in these new jobs, it's great that we're having 13 new people to Durham moving in every day, but we need to make sure that we then say, we're also getting 5 more people in Durham jobs so they can grow with it as well. So we need to start focusing on hire local, work local, and develop local.
Thank you. Ms. Caballero?
Thank you for the question. So I think the idea of shared prosperity is exactly right. It means make your table bigger, make your tent larger, whatever analogy you want to use. And definitely we've seen a lot of folks. I will say I moved to Durham in 2010, and it is a vastly different city just from then. When I first moved here, people were really, really excited about a lot of the things that were happening. And I was, having come from a city that was going through rampant gentrification, being like, you like it now, but in 10 years, you're not going to like it because you can't afford to live here anymore. And so we have a lot of work to do. I think that our Office of Economic OEWD department, with its Built to Last program that we put $300,000 in this last budget cycle, is an example of that. It's an example of really helping small minority, black and brown entrepreneurs access capital and really also access skills so that they can launch their businesses and help build their wealth in this community is going to be really important. I think absolutely trying to hire local is also very, very important. We are limited by some of the things what we would like to do, in the sense that we have to go with the lowest bid contract, which is unfortunate because I think we would be more aggressive in many of our ideas if we didn't have that restriction. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Wagstaff?
Well, everybody knows me. Shared prosperity for me means from the bottom up, not the top down. That trickle-down effect never happens in Durham. We have leaders that will vote on things like giving a white contractor $400,000, and the contractor has never hired a minority since he's been in business for 21 years. And we have an ordinance here that says that even though you take the lowest responsible bidder, you still have to meet a certain minority participation rate in Durham. And that was not adhered to, and this council voted on this just recently. So if you're gonna sit here and say that you believe in shared prosperity, you have to actually show me that in your voting record when you sit on this council. We have to make sure that minority businesses are a part of the makeup and the fabric of this community. All of this building, like Daniel said, I agree wholeheartedly what he said about you have contractors that you bring in, you tell us that you're hiring a black developer from Charlotte, but they're gonna bring their own people in. They have to hire within. We have too many people in this community that are underserved and overlooked, and we have to make sure that also when we're bringing jobs to the city, we have to make sure they match the skill set of our most unemployed, because that's one of the things we don't have right now. We have a lot of unemployed people, and their skill set does not match the type of jobs that are being voted on and development that is coming into Durham. So we have to be able to walk the walk as well as talk it.
Thank you. Mr. Gunn?
Yeah, I think when we talk about shared prosperity or expanding the table, as Councilwoman Caballero says, I think there's one thing to expand the table, but that means you have to also get more food for the table so that everyone can have some, right? And so I think creating shared prosperity requires economic development. It requires growing our economic base. It's one thing to focus on small businesses and growing our existing entrepreneurial base, which I think is important, which is why I co-founded Provident 1898, a center designed to help grow entrepreneurship for Black and brown folks in Durham, specifically for Black folks and the rich history of entrepreneurship we have here. But I think economic development in terms of bringing jobs to our community is super important as well. If you look at the reason why Durham had the highest Black middle class or the largest Black middle class in the United States at its height, it was largely because of jobs with big industry, jobs at places like American Tobacco, North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance, Mechanics and Farmers Bank. We've adopted a posture on city council that is completely against growing jobs through the larger sector, through the manufacturing sector. I've been doing this job for 3 years, and our largest adversary to bringing jobs to this community has been city government. We don't want to incentivize job growth. We just did a study with Research Triangle Institute, RTI, that says for every one job that we create through an economic development incentive, 1.5 ancillary jobs are created. So that basically means for every one job you bring to the community, you get another job and a half in support of that job. That's how we grow our economy. We can't do it all through entrepreneurship programs. Some people need jobs today, and the best way to do that is through incentivizing job growth and holding people accountable to hire Durham folks. That's how we do it.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. To me, shared prosperity means that the benefits of Durham's growth are broadly distributed, and right now we know that that's not happening. We are developing a new program in the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, as Councilmember Caballero mentioned, that's designed to provide technical support and training and also funding, capital, to Black and Latino-owned businesses here in Durham so that we can continue to build our small local business infrastructure and do economic development from the ground up. I'm excited about that approach to economic development here in Durham as an alternative to some of the projects that we've done in the past where we've given large incentives, $1 million or more, to companies from out of town. That money just leaves our community. We haven't forced those companies to make sure that their staff are being paid living wages, that the jobs, are safe. We even had a company have a huge dispute with some subcontractors over payment. So making sure that we're keeping things local and working our economy from the grassroots level is really important to me. I also want to mention employee ownership. I think building the number of companies in our community that are employee-owned, where people have an ownership stake in their own company, is a way to build shared prosperity and economic democracy. And we're working within the city now to help people both start and convert existing companies to employee ownership. And I'm really excited about continuing to do that work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Water question. A recent issue of Consumer Reports says that it's the poor people who are most likely to be drinking bottled water. So how do we increase the transparency and trust in Durham's water system? Starting with Ms. Johnson.
Thank you for that question, and that's a really great question. So in Durham, we have an excellent water system. The city has been proactive for 40 years or more about buying up land around our major water sources to preserve quality. And we have, we're working on a program that would allow us to store far more water than we actually need right now in Tier Quarry. I feel like of all the infrastructure concerns around growth, the water system is the one that I'm the least concerned about. People who are buying bottled water, I think sometimes it's a lack of trust in municipal water, even though there's a lot of data out there that municipal water is actually safer than bottled water and it's regulated more heavily. But I think the bigger problem is pipes in people's homes. I know in my home, I have an older home, and some of my pipes have lead solder. And so I have had concerns, especially when my kids were little, about that lead getting in the water. There are filtration options for that. The city has distributed refrigerator magnets instructing people how to get the lead out of their water. I think a public education campaign is what's needed. We have done that in the past, and I think it's really effective. And in some cities, where there are bigger problems, Durham has a lead problem, of course, but in cities like Flint, where there are larger lead problems, there have been public efforts to distribute mitigation measures. Of course, that has not been as effective as we would like it to be in some other places, but I think it could be very effective here in Durham.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer?
I think one of the things we need to do is educate people on what bottled water really is. I was just looking this up. I just got a bottle of water myself. We didn't have one. And it is municipal water from Morganton, North Carolina. Publix goes to the tap in Morganton and fills it up. Most bottled water is filled up from tap water. They oxygenate it, they stick it in a nice plastic bottle and say, here you go. That's what we need to make sure we do, is to explain to people your bottled water is just tap water in a different packaging. But we also need to make sure that we actually are transparent in testing and things like that, because the last thing we really want right now is another Flint, Michigan. Everyone's terrified that how do we really know our water is safe, because the governments lie to us. And so I think Durham does have good water. We've had some issues with some discoloration lately, but it's normally been good. It's gotten bad, but I think you just need to explain to the people with that. You need to show them the studies, you need to show them the tests, and like I said, educate them on it. I mean, this is tap water from Morganton, North Carolina, so you're not getting different water if you get bottled water. And so again, it's that whole education thing, and show them the studies, show them the tests, show them that we actually are taking steps to make the water safe.
Ms. Caballero?
Thank you. Yeah, Durham has great water. We've actually won awards about our water here. It's actually one of the departments I've been most impressed with on my time on council, and how intentional and well thought out our policies and plan is. You know, as our population has grown, our water consumption actually hasn't. And so that's been really interesting to see, because you would think that our water usage would go up as our population is expanding, and that's not the case. I think that we do need to have more education. I will say that, like, this is a different side of it, but I know that the buyback program around using low flush toilets is really, really successful, and so I'd be interested to see how they've been able to get so many folks to do that kind of stuff, and then apply that to our water. I will say that in the city, when you fill up your reusable water bottle, it is very satisfying to see that little meter that says one less plastic bottle. So I think in some places, things like that could be really useful as well.
Ms. Wagstaff?
Just for full disclosure, I am a tap water drinker, straight from the tap. Never used the bottle. But I do agree. That's the one thing I can actually say, that Durham has had a great history with their water. And I remember when, and some of you may, when Durham actually bottled water. Every time I would go to another city representing Durham, I used to take that bottled water and I would tell those people, I'm gonna give you the best thing Durham has. And I would hand them one bottle of our Durham water. I think that we have to focus on making sure that our waterways are kept clean and that they're environmentally friendly. We have to find more ways of reusable waterways. And I think that everything that has been said completely aligns with the water that Durham provides. And we do have the best water in the state. I do say that myself.
Mr. Gunn?
Yeah, this might be the first question that we all agree on, I think, so far this evening. You know, you heard in my intro that I'm a Durhamite, fourth generation. My dad loves Durham even more than I do, and the only thing that he loves more than Durham is Durham water. He brags about how good the tap water is all the time. We go to different towns, and he won't drink out the tap, but at home he will, and I was raised drinking out the tap as well. So I think we do have great water. I was approached at Phoenix Fest a couple weeks ago by some gentlemen who said that there's a recent study, though, that says our water quality is lower than it used to be. I've asked them to share that with me and haven't seen it. So without any additional data, I'm left to believe that our water is still the best in the state. So I will agree with all the folks up here that I love Durham water, and that's all I drink. So
Thank you.
Thank you again. I'm so glad to see smiles and agreement. I'm going to bring some vinegar to you then. This is a very strong question, and it's in big letters, and I'm going to read it. And I like to suggest that maybe if you can keep it short so we could continue asking more. We have roughly about 15, maybe 20 minutes. We can stretch it, and we still have a lot of questions from the community and some that we have prepared. So I'm going to start with Ms. Johnson, since you just spoke, and go around the five of you. What are your plans when gangs and gun violence infiltrate your community?
Thank you for the question. I think my plans for my community would be the same as any community in Durham. I don't think that my neighborhood is special in some way. But we do have an excellent strategy here in Durham for dealing with gang violence, and our police department has has continued to focus the majority of their resources on violent crime. There is a gang safety task force as well as a violent crime task force that meets regularly to deal with this issue. And the police department continues to focus the majority of their energy on the very few people who cause the majority of harm in community, whether those people are members of gangs or not. And I think that strategy has been effective. We want to be very targeted. We want to use police resources primarily to fight violent crime and not to deal with the overcriminalization of small acts. Like, you know, we've recently decided that possession of small amounts of marijuana would be a lowest level enforcement priority. We don't want to have our police spending time on things that don't really pose a threat to our community so that we can focus their resources on the things that really do pose a threat. Our police chief has stated at a couple of press conferences recently and generally in her strategy reports that she supports that she supports spending her resources on fighting violent crime and focusing energy on those people who the police department most suspect of being violent, and will continue to do that.
Thanks. Mr. Meyer?
I think, obviously, unfortunately, on the city council, there's limits as to what you can do. We don't do anything with setting bonds. We don't do anything with setting sentences. That's all the district attorney and the judges set with something else. You need law enforcement. You need police officers in the neighborhoods and in the communities to deal with the people who are causing the problems and who are the shooters. The other thing you need to do is to go into the communities and make sure they trust law enforcement and they trust the prosecution, because right now in most of these shootings, it's not a question of who did it. It's a question of can we prove it? And the answer is oftentimes no, because you have people saying, don't talk, let's try to do this. Durham Beyond Policing is, we're gonna send people to talk to both sides and try to work it out. So we're gonna tell someone who was shot, forgive him. Don't seek punishment, don't cooperate with law enforcement. That's where our disconnect is. That's why you need more police officers. They can help with violent crime on a security level. That is where our focus needs to be. No one cares about a little bit of weed anymore, trust me. They haven't charged that in Durham for 5 or 6 years or more. But the police can be our security. You saw that in Ohio. The police officers were there. They were able to stop a mass shooting from being a lot worse. But we've got to work on rebuilding the trust in the community so that the community knows if I cooperate with this law enforcement officer, not only they can be prosecuted effectively, I'm going to be safe. Because the sad thing is so often a witness goes and talks to the police and their house is shot up the next day. And we need to make sure our law enforcement is trained. I hold them accountable. And one of my things is to make sure they do their jobs right. And we need to keep focusing on that.
Thanks. Ms. Caballero?
Thank you for the question. So I think that focusing our efforts where we are doing at violent crime is exactly the way to go. I think that part of this, so a few months ago, and I'll use this as an example, and this is why I believe violence interrupter programs are so important. There was a gentleman, we were getting emails from a neighborhood where I think a young man had been released from jail or prison, and he was a target for other gangs. And so people were out looking for him, and so then it created a lot of violence on the street. And so we were able to, because of a city staff member, reach this young individual, find him another place to go. He was terrified, and yes, he had committed a crime, but he was also 18 or 19 years old, and it's not okay to just wash your hands of somebody at that age and say, you know what, we're done. You've created violence in our community. And so that's what I mean when I say we need violence interrupters. We have folks who've committed crimes. We need this is where, again, collaborating with our county is going to be so crucial, because there's a mental health side sometimes, there's a health side to this that we as a city are just not going to be able to do on our own. And again, we need access into our schools and really thinking about this holistically and collaboratively. We're just not going to fix it. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Wastaff?
I'm very perplexed about hearing some of these answers here when we have a council that basically voted against the #1 crime preventer, having police on the streets, having their presence. When police are present in black neighborhoods, this is unfortunate, it's called over-policing. When they come in white communities, it's called presence. Why is there a difference? This is the problem that we have. First of all, in order to deal with the crime and the issues that are happening right now in the community, the community have to trust the people that are making the decisions. If the community don't trust these people, they're not going to trust those people in the streets that are supposed to be out there to help us. If you have trustworthy council members that the community believes that these people have their best interests at heart, then those people are the spokespeople that will go into the community, convince the community to work with law enforcement, to not see them as a threat. But if you have leadership that views them as a threat and they make that a public statement that they see law enforcement as a threat to the community, there's no way we're going to be able to bridge that gap where we have to look at our police department as people that come into the community to help and not just be there to over-police you. So we have to make sure that when we talk about the community and crime, everybody is not crazy. Everything is not revolved around mental health. People commit crimes for different reasons, mostly economic.
Thanks. Mr. Gunn?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This is obviously one of the most urgent issues for all of us, which is why I think a lot of the questions tonight have been about safety. It is, with all due respect to Councilwoman Johnson, it is a little frustrating to hear someone say that our gang intervention strategy is working when we have 32 murders as compared to 16 in 2018. We have 32 murders over the first 9 months of this year so far. The proof is in the numbers there, right? This council is they love numbers and data. That's a great data point to look at. So I think it is not effective. We're not doing everything that we can do. One of the things that we can do is properly resource our law enforcement agencies, and I've said that several times and will continue to say that. Councilmember Middleton did a press conference this week and said the same thing. We're not doing everything that we can do, and we must do more to protect ourselves and protect our community members and our neighbors. As far as gang intervention, I think there's a couple ways that we can do it. I think law enforcement is one side of it. I do support a community safety task force as well, but I think it has to include credible individuals, people who are connected to the community in a real way, people that people can trust, people that know these neighborhoods. If the first time they've seen you is once you got elected as an elected official, I don't think you're going to be credible in those neighborhoods. So we need people who know the neighborhoods, know the folks that are in gangs, right? And have relationships with people to be able to facilitate conversations. And as Ms. Wagstaff said, engage law enforcement, because ultimately every human being wants to be safe. Gang member, non-gang member, we all want to be safe, and we deserve to be safe in Durham. And we deserve better than a council that's telling us that 32 murders is acceptable and that means we're having an effective strategy. That's disappointing.
Thank you. I'm going to come again with two more questions from the audience. Very strong words. This is just for the incumbent, so Ms. Johnson is started. I think I'm going to start with Ms. Caballero, and then I'll go back to Ms. Johnson. If you could make it short, maybe 30 seconds, if you can. There are claims that council members are out of touch with many residents who are lower income or with communities of color. I'm assuming that we're also including Hispanics here. What have you done to engage specifically with these communities? Ms. Caballero.
Thank you for the question. So I will speak mostly to the Latinx or Latino community because that's quite frankly where I've done more of my work. While I have been on council and before, I worked with Chief Davis last year. She did a lot of outreach within our Latino churches and also in some of the apartment complexes after there had been some pretty strong assaults. So Latino folks were getting very targeted. Not this one, it was this winter as well, but last winter there was like a big spike. And so I personally sat down with the chief, several police officers. They came up with a community strategy plan. They hit up most of the churches, and they're still doing that. So that's one thing that I can do as far as safety. I've also worked pretty diligently around HB 370, which was the bill that was introduced at the state level that would have essentially curtailed what several sheriffs around the state were doing, including our sheriff here, which was to not cooperate with ICE. So I led the effort statewide around local elected leaders to write a letter to Governor Cooper. I went consistently to the General Assembly. I've also helped a lot within the sanctuary movement churches. I visited all residents who are in sanctuary churches, not just in Durham. Unfortunately, Samuel Olier Bruno was deported, Thanksgiving of 2018, so he's not a resident. I continue to visit. I try to go to as many community events as I'm invited to. I still participate in my kids' schools where there's large Latino populations and engage there. Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Johnson, very brief if you can.
Sure. So with regard to engagement specifically with the Black community, I'm very involved in the labor movement, and we have a couple of really strong Black labor organizations here in Durham. There's a We Dream in Black chapter from the National Domestic Workers Association and a really strong Fight for 15 chapter. And I've done some work with them. I've also done some work with Flock, or supporters of Flock, the farm worker union, which is predominantly Latino. I do a lot of work in our public schools, which are, of course, majority kids of color, and have, with regard to the Latino community, have also worked, visited folks in sanctuary, worked on the issue with the sheriff's bill, and have worked on the issue around checkpoints and faith ID and helping folks get ID so that they have a way to identify themselves here in the city.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It is 12 minutes past 8, and our plan was to finish around 8:15. So I'd like to suggest that we have the closing statements. If you can keep it short, it's fine. 90 seconds will take us probably to about 8:20 when we need to get ready to go home. Can I start with closing statements with Ms. Wagstaff, and I go around?
Okay.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody that took the time to stay with us tonight. I know it's late and we have kids that we may have to put to bed, or you may be grandmothers like myself that have to pick up a glam baby in the morning. But I just want to say that I appreciate the opportunity, and I want you to know that I'm running because I think that there's something missing on this council right now. And I think that there's a vision that has been missing for a while, and I call it the Lowry salt seasoning. Right now, there's no seasoning on this council. There's a view that a lot of us, when you look around this room, I see a lot of seasoning, but I don't see it when I come up here to City Hall. And I think that we have to bring that common sense back, and we have to bring people back to the table that actually have an understanding of the community. And when somebody asks me, what is your relationship with the Black community, I'm not gonna name off a lot of organizations. I'm gonna tell you exactly what my relationship is. I'm in the community. I'm Black. I go in the majority community. I know what it is that they're suffering from. I talk to the gang members. I talk to the people that are committing the crime. I know what they're feeling. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm someone that's twice removed from this community. So I'm asking that you really review your selection this year of 6 people on that slate and understand that there's no political organization that should dictate who you vote for. You need to make an informed decision. So I ask you to vote for the one sensible candidate, Jackie Wagstaff.
Thank you. Mr. Gunn.
Thank you. Again, thank you all very much for taking time to come. It is late, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. It's kind of cool to sit up here, actually, sort of as we're aspiring to be on city council. The reality is apparent, right? I don't have to tell you that there's 50,000 people in our community in poverty right now. 15,000 of those people are children. The vast majority of those people in poverty are women. 1 out of 2 of those people in poverty are Black people. In a Durham that calls itself the most progressive city in North Carolina, that doesn't feel like progress to me. Murders are double. You hear sirens passing. It's a little bit appropriate for this statement. Murders are double in 2019 over the past 9 months as compared to 2018. And we have a council that consistently tells us that they're doing everything that they can. They're telling you all that this is as good as it can get. You've heard their responses about safety. You've heard their responses about economic development. Every one of their responses is about what they're already doing, and they're convincing you that things are okay. You tell me if you think 50,000 people in poverty is acceptable. You tell me if you think a double murder rate is acceptable in our city. And if it is acceptable to you, then I encourage you to vote for the incumbents. But if you believe that we can do better in this community, if you believe that we can make Durham safe, if you believe that we can help lift people out of poverty, if you believe that the residents and citizens of Durham deserve better, I encourage you to vote for change. I have a lot of respect for these council people, and I think they're doing a good job. But I was raised to believe that if better is possible, good is not good enough. We deserve better, and better is possible in Durham. I ask for your vote today. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you again, everyone, for coming out tonight. Really appreciate all of your questions and sticking with us for this long. I'm running for re-election because I'm excited about the work that we've been able to do for the last 4 years, and I want to keep doing that work. We've made unprecedented investments in affordable housing here in our community and are looking forward to making even more investments after we pass this housing bond. We've engaged more people than ever in making decisions here in our community, bringing people into the conversation who have never engaged in our democracy before. We continue to invest in sustainability, in transit, in doing what we need to do as a community to fight climate change, and we're putting millions of dollars into inclusive economic development and starting a robust community conversation about where we need to move to be even safer. I'm excited about what we're doing in Durham. I want to be able to continue to do that work here on the City Council. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Early voting is open, so make your way to the polls anytime, and I hope that I have your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Meyer?
I do thank y'all for coming out. Ms. Johnson's right. Early voting has started. Vote. We need more than 9% of the people to vote. Durham is doing good things. Most of us, I mean, at the end of the day, we agree on probably 70 to 80% of the stuff. I'm not going to say Durham is falling apart, but Durham is in a crisis mode in public safety, and the council is tone deaf in saying, well, we'll eventually get to it. We'll deal with it later. No, we need to deal with it now. We need to make sure Durham is prosperous for everyone. They say they're Bull City together, Durham for all, but they're only representing a small portion of Durham. We need to represent everybody. You had asked an earlier question about how would we represent the people who didn't vote for us, because that's what we're elected to do. I'm sick of the Republicans saying Obama wasn't my president. Now people saying Trump's not my president. Yeah, they are. I am your city councilman if I'm elected, whether you voted for me or not, and I'll make sure I remember that every day. I'm not running as a block. I'm not saying, hey, there's 3 of us, vote for 1, you get 3. Vote for me. I also say vote for change. You've seen some of us. We tend to agree on a lot of stuff, but you'll have open discussion. You'll have different viewpoints. That's what you need on a city council. That's what Durham needs. We're all in this together, and I will work with whoever I'm on the city council with to make sure that I'm listening to all the voices and that we have open discussion, not behind closed doors where we then come out and say, here's our vote, but out in front of everybody and listen to everybody and disagree with people and make sure that we can listen to it. We're all in this. We need to make sure we keep Durham a safe and prosperous place for everybody, including those who don't support us.
Thank you. Ms. Caballero?
Thank you. Thank you so much for everyone who came out tonight. It's been a rigorous campaign season. Early voting has started. The general election is on November 5th, where the mayor's race and the housing bond will also be on your ballot. I just want to share a story because this, I think, is illuminating where we are as a city. When I first moved here, the press that Durham was getting, tastiest town of the South, spend 3 days, New York Times, in Durham. It was an arc of gentrification. Now when I go and I leave Durham, what are we known for? Our police reform, the fact that we're putting the largest affordable housing bond in the history of North Carolina on the ballot. Our PB process is actually internationally recognized right now. And those are bold policy. That's bold policy that actually expands our democracy, engages as many residents as possible, and actually calls you to come into this and do it with us. And I want to continue to do that, and I think that we are moving in the right direction. We are absolutely not perfect. We actually rely on you to help us make decisions, and I say that between eviction diversion, our equitable engagement plan, and many other things. We have listened to residents, and we have moved, and we have shifted, and we have seen tremendous amount of progress. And when I think about where we are as a nation right now, you cannot compare what has happened in the last 4 years of where we've moved as a country. It is absolutely different here. Your city council members care about you, we listen to you, and we value democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Audience, how about an applause now? Thank you and good night.
Thank you.